Okay, everybody, hello, hello, hello. You are very, very welcome to, believe it or not, the fourth in this series of home games webinars, where they kind of started off as a bit of fun, and then they sort of still are, but they've kind of grown arms and legs now. I'm joined by the amazing Cathi Harrison, who will be talking all kinds of sense to you very, very shortly. I can see the numbers climbing. There's loads and loads of you registered this week, which is wonderful. Thank you very much for coming and spending a little bit of time with us. There's nothing grand about these, right? If it's the first one you've been on, the idea was always that I was hearing too much about how people are responding to COVID-19 and all the rest of it. And I wanted to do something which allowed us to cover areas that we might be business as usual, right? We might talk about these things if none of this was happening. And that's what Home Games is about. So although we can't avoid all those big topics, that's not what we're going to talk about today. Format is half an hour. For the main bit, we'll get through all our content inside half an hour. And then we did it first time last week and it went nuts. It was really good fun. We do something called the after party. It's not much of a party, if I'm really honest, but that's really up to you. It's early enough to start drinking as far as I'm concerned, though I am just on Scotland's national drink at the moment rather than anything else. And we'll keep the chat open for 15-20 minutes and we can cover anything and stay if you want and don't if you don't and all that kind of stuff. There'll be 1 week we won't do the after party coming up in a couple of weeks, and that's because there's a HOWOW on that day, so that'll be on straight on after us, so we'll clear the airwaves for that. So let's have a look at what we are going to cover today. This is where I can always get things horribly wrong, but we'll try to do better. Cathi and I will get quite small quite soon, and that's that. Excellent. So our session today, we will cover something that we got into in the chat, the after party last week. We got talking about advisor charging and stuff, and specifically what we got into I thought was really interesting. I'm not sure anybody else thought it was, but I thought it was, and that's about whether different kinds of firms charge different amounts depending on what kinds of services they offer. So I'm going to do a few minutes on that, and as usual I share a little bit of research that we've done, which we stuck in the field tail end of last year with about 400 firms. But then much more interestingly, we're going to talk about digital business. Now, we did some of this a couple of weeks ago with Tim Page, and he gave us an advisor's eye view of some stuff, and that was really interesting. But we're going to have a little bit of a different lens on things today with Cathi of the Verve Group. Now, Verve Group gets up to loads and loads of different stuff, and Cathi will share that with you, but quite a lot of it is around compliance and support for firms. And really, what we're going to get into there is how can business be more digital, not in terms of digital signature with a provider, we all know that kind of thing is important, but in the way that advisor firms actually run. I think it's going to be really interesting. Then there will be a joke, and then there's the after party. The t-shirt this week is I'm sure you've spotted it already. Of course, most of you are well up on this kind of stuff. Someone might actually laugh this time, says Mike, who formerly worked for the Landcat. In the chat. What a way to resign. Is from 80s British pagan thrash metal stalwart Sabbath, of course, and this is the Dreamweaver t-shirt. For those of you that are, of course, into your 80s British pagan thrash, Sabbath really at the pinnacle, maybe the best lyrics ever penned on a thrash record. And if I had to pick one thrash metal record that I could take with me to my thrash desert island, I think it might be Dreamweaver. So if you're in the mood for something amazing, you could go and check that out, but you probably won't. All right, let's get into it. So again, advisor charging. This is kind of interesting stuff, I think. So, you see, this is why I've got slides, because I forget things. And I didn't say it was professional, right? I just said we were doing it. The web address on the screen there, the SurveyMonkey address, is the link to our platform ratings survey. And below your video feed, there'll be a little green button which says, please rate your platforms. That takes you to that link. Now, what we're asking advisors or platform users, which could be paraplanners, any kind of advice professional really that's involved in using platforms, is if you can spare us 5 minutes at some point over the next few days, please, 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 could you drop on here and let us know how your platforms are doing. There's a special section in there, particularly around the responsive platforms to all the virus nonsense and the current unpleasantness, as I like to call it. We would love to get a kind of aggregated view of how everybody's doing, and I'll publish that back on a Home Games webinar probably at the start of next month. It looks like we're going to be still doing these for a few more weeks. So again, if you can spare us just a couple of minutes, it really doesn't take long, about 3 minutes per platform, then we would massively appreciate it, please and thank you. Right, here we go, advisor charging. So just El Stato to start, right? I'm going to keep an eye on the chat as well. I honestly hate to think what Barry Nielsen has just put on the chat as some kind of link, and I'm not going to click it because then I'll be doing that instead of this. So we asked firms, first of all, how do they charge? So not amounts, we're going to get onto that in a sec. And we asked it for initial and ongoing. Well, you can see it for yourself. For initial fees, that's the yellow bars, about a third of firms said they just charged a percentage. Nearly half mix it up. Yeah, thank you, Steve. That's right. Click our link, not Barry's. About half mix it up between percentage and fixed fees. Only about 13% were charging purely fixed fees for initial work, and only a vanishingly small number charging time-based. So that's probably not a surprise. I think I've seen lots and lots of usage of our initial report is $2.5 grand or whatever else. And then there might be an implementation charge, which might vary with the number of plans you're dealing with and all that stuff. Maybe more interesting is the ongoing stuff, where just over 2/3 of firms said that they only charged straightforward percentages. Only about 20% said they mixed it up a bit. And when we look at the comments, the vox pops that sit behind this stuff, that tended to be that they would have a minimum. So it would be 0.75% with a minimum of £1,000 a year or whatever it might be, or a cap for maximum fees as well. So overwhelmingly percentage based. Fixed fees on an ongoing basis, only 6.5% of our respondents, remember about 400 firms, said that they charged an ongoing fixed fee, whether that's a subscription basis or just a, I don't know, we charge £1,000 a year or whatever it may be. And almost nobody said they were charging time-based. Interestingly, some people ticked that box there and said, well, we record time, but actually they still charge on a percentage of assets. So there's virtually nobody in our sample, right? It doesn't mean it's every firm in the UK, it's only 400 of them. In our sample, virtually nobody charging on a time basis. When we look at ongoing advisor charge amount, so this is for the percentage-based guys, right? And I've brought together a couple of exercises here. This isn't just out of the one in November, so it doesn't map perfectly onto the previous one, but it's not bad. John asks, how much clustering did we see around, say, 1%? And this is the slide for that, John. Look at that. About 35% of firms charging 1% a year, and then hardly anybody doing gradations of that. So we went from what did we do? 0.6 up in 5 basis point increments, and you can see the big bars. It's 1%, 0.75, and 0.5, and then there's a kind of a smattering of people charging in between. And that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Why is it exactly 1% or 0.75 or 0.5? What's going on? I don't know. Maybe we can talk about it in the chat, but or in the after party. But it's remarkable that people seem to have settled on round figures here. And so I guess the question has to be, right, how much science is going into this? And there's a kind of reflexive thing that people say, which is, well, it used to be 3 plus a half, and guess what? It's still 3 plus a half. And that's not true. If these stats are anything to go by, it's not 3 plus a half. It's something, right, on an upfront basis, followed by 0.75 or 1 are more popular. And Joe Campbell says the same reason nobody gets out of bed at 6:05, which I guess is as good an answer as we're going to get for that. Not a lot of science is going into this. Well, I don't know if you mean the charging, Helena, or my presentation of this stuff. If it's the latter, then I certainly agree with you. But overwhelmingly, there are people charging 0.75 or 1% ongoing. So if you're somewhere in there, it feels about right. I know there's Barry from Nucleus on the chat. Nucleus do an average in their census each year, and I can't remember what the last one was. Barry, if you can remember, you might type it in, but it was somewhere around 0.8 or something. And that would kind of chime with this. So if we're averaging somewhere between 0.75 and 1% is kind of there. So that's the kind of quantum of the charge. But 81 bips, thanks Barry, that's brilliant. 81 basis points for Nucleus users. If there's any other platforms in the chat and they know, they could chuck that in as well. Not everyone's as open about this sort of stuff, but I think it's really important that we can see what's going on. Now, loads of things can come out of that, right? So the first is that if it is true that it used to be 3 plus a half, then if it's now 3 plus 0.75 or 1, it's no surprise that post RDR total cost of ownership has gone up, right? Some platforms have increased their fees compared to pre-RDR, the ones that were around, though that's come down over time. There's nothing that says that investment funds have got any cheaper. Some of them have got more expensive. But advisor charges represent a fair amount, actually, of what's gone up since the fateful days of RDR. And that's as it should be. Advisors should be taking a lion's share, I think. But it's kind of interesting. The rest of the kind of supply chain hasn't taken enough of a bath yet, probably. So there we go on amounts. Now, but this is the one I really won't get into, and it is a little bit complex, right? So, I mean, it's not complex, right? Y'all are probably, I don't know, statistics graduates or something, but I did English literature, so I can barely count. Interestingly, in the early days of the LangCat, when I was publishing some pricing stuff or whatever, a competitor of ours said to somebody that gleefully reported back to me that it's just a bloke in a spreadsheet if you're into that kind of thing. And if they only knew that I've got a total Excel blindness and I can't use it, so I use Post-it notes and a calculator and a bottle of whiskey. It was, it was surprisingly not as wrong as you might think it was when Steve started checking over my work. Anyway, right, here's how it breaks down by how people run their investment propositions. So we asked firms, as back to the Big 400 survey now, do you run a suite of models? Do you use DFM models, multi-asset or multi-manager funds, or provider-specific kit as your main centralized investment proposition, right? And then we asked questions about what do you charge on an ongoing basis? And we've mapped the two of them together. So what can we see? Well, what we can see is those that are running their own models do tend to be charging a little more. I said last week in the after party that I didn't think there was any correlation between higher advisor charges and firms running their own models. I thought it was pretty flat right across, and it turns out that I wasn't right. So in here, about 36% of firms are charging 1% plus if they're running their own models. Right now, that's for their advisor charges. Now, most firms, I think, still don't split out the actual advisor charge from any kind of model type charge, and there's a reason for that, which is if they split out a charge for running a models, it would attract VAT. And that's a bit of an area of debate I know that's going on at the moment. So you've got the VAT issue there. So about a third of firms just over charging more than 1% if they run models, whereas you can see it's down around a quarter for all the other ones. Still, the kind of biggest number just about for each segment is 0.75 to 1%, which probably isn't a massive surprise. And that's pretty consistent. And then we can see where the slack's taken up. Only about 25% of firms charging 0.5 to 0.75 if they're running their own models. Those that are using DFM outsourcing or provider-specific KIPs, and that's things like Royal London Grips or PruFund, that kind of stuff. They are charging a little bit less. So taken in aggregate, probably the advisory sector is charging a little bit more for running its own models. So I guess the open question from that is that enough? Are they charging enough? Somebody said in the chat, I think it was Lee last week, said, running a set of models isn't free, right? It's an extremely time-consuming thing to do, and with MiFID II and all the rest of it, that just keeps going and going, that's that feels right to me. And so I wonder if the furthest left set of bars there with the running a suite of models, I wonder if that might drift up, so that 25% in the grey there gets squeezed down and the yellow and blue start to expand out. If you're charging more than 1%, of course, there's only so much headroom, certainly inside what's generally perceived to be the important 2% figure. So we'll get inside there. I've got a few things in on the chat. Science in the fixed fees, says Tim Page. I think that's probably right, Tim, because you've got to know what to put into a fixed fee, and rather than the cross subsidy you get in naturally in percentage based. I mean, there's cross subsidy and everything, right? But a little bit more in there. Norman asks which whiskey aids mental arithmetic back best. Sorry, Kate says Macallan 30-year-old. Kate, I don't know, man. I would probably favour a Highland Park 18, and anybody that feels the urge to buy me a bottle of Highland Park 18 should definitely act on that. Lee is entirely incorrect. There's nothing good about VAT 69 except it does strip paint very effectively. And Chris Davies just jumped on. Any research on difference in accumulation and de-accumulation charging? We don't have that at the moment, Chris, but it's definitely something we're going to check. Kate says I'd be wrong with my whiskey choice there. I'm happy to take a Pepsi challenge or even a whiskey tasting challenge, Kate, once all this is over. It sounds pretty good to me. Right, that's enough of that. So now what I'm going to do is get rid of this. And I'll unfocus the screen, and let's get into chat to Cathi, which will be much more interesting anyway. So Cathi, thank you for coming on. Okay. We might be joined at some point by your wee fella.
I was thinking it's sod's law, isn't it, with kids? So when I've had video calls that I really, really needed him to stay quiet on, he's been kind of all over. But then because you said, oh, it's totally fine, it's really relaxed, I don't feel hear or see anything.
So listen, we were chatting yesterday in prepping up for this a little bit, which may surprise people that there's some prep does go into it. You wouldn't know, right? And you were saying some really interesting stuff about stuff that it's been kind of spurred on by what's going on. So it's not your reaction to the pandemic, but it's kind of got you going a bit faster in a direction you were going anyway, in terms of how you're building the services. So maybe you might just tell us, I think lots of people know what the Verve Group does, but would you tell us briefly what the Verve Group gets up to, and then a little bit about how you're trying to move things on?
Yeah, sure, yeah. So within the Verve Group is Parasols, which is the power planning business. There's Apricity, which provides compliance support. The Art of Finance, which does training. So that was only launched last year. And was kind of mainly face-to-face training courses, taking people through power planning, compliance, and getting their diploma. And then Verve itself kind of sat as a group that kind of incorporated the three businesses, but then it was beginning to develop as a standalone brand, and we had a conference booked, which has obviously been postponed, and awards and so on. So I guess with the three businesses within Verve, they were all at different stages anyway of their own journey. Obviously, Parasols, being 11 years old, nearly, was quite established and ticking along. Apricity, sort of 3 years old, was a bit like my toddler, just kind of finding its feet and steady away. And then Art of Finance was just brand new, and we were really just getting to grips with it all. But with all of the businesses, there was always kind of an eye on the future and what we think we'd be building towards and what the next steps were for each of them. And so when all of this happened, when it all kicked off, the first thing we did about 4 weeks ago was I got everybody together, and I just said the way I personally, my belief when we come out of the other side of this is that we won't go straight back to normal. What's actually going to happen right now is it's just going to accelerate all the change in, obviously not just in financial services, in so many different areas, so many industries. And that basically what we'd thought would be our next sort of 5 year or 10 years worth of development, I wanted to do now, to do immediately, to do within sort of the next 6 weeks from that point. Because, you know, it's nothing like an absolutely unrealistic time frame. So I hope people get out of bed on a morning.
Bet everyone was delighted when they heard that.
But we did, so, you know, we kind of called it our Project 2030 and said, you know, when we come out the other end of this, I think the world will look like we were expecting it to look in 2030. We've got a 2030 task force. We kind of carved the businesses up in 2 halves. Half of them are continuing with the day-to-day stuff, the stuff that we were already doing, and then half of them are building the kind of the whole new world that we think finance will look like when we come on the other side of this.
And what does it look like? What do you think is going to be this new normal? What do you think will change?
Well, I think a lot of what people are doing now, everybody's having to adapt. So in the same way that we're kind of progressing and pushing forward the stuff that we would have done anyway and that we kind of had in the pipeline, everybody is, firms are, advisors are, the way that they're dealing with clients, their clients are, you know, you're dealing with 60, 70, 80-year-olds now who would never, ever have dreamt of going onto a Zoom call with their advisor. Now they haven't got a choice and they need to talk to their advisor. They're very uncertain about everything that's going on. And then actually they do that Zoom call and think, oh, that wasn't bad. That was all right. I've got that reassurance that I needed. You didn't have to come into my house. So everybody's being pushed beyond the boundaries that they would have done otherwise. And I just think once we get to the other side, I think maybe at the beginning, if it was going to be, you know, 2 or 3 weeks and we'll just kind of get our head down and we'll come out the other side and we'll go back to how we were, that might be the case. But I think the repercussions of this is going to go on for such a long time. It'll be really hard to go back to what we were doing before. I think, you know, firms are already, advisors, us as a firm, are already seeing kind of all the efficiencies that you can get, the way that some people much prefer working from home, the fact that we don't need to be spending as much on offices that we thought we were, the way that we can build close relationships with our advisors because we can speak to them, because actually all of a sudden going on a video call doesn't seem like a big thing. They've already got the software downloaded and they're really comfortable with it. So I just think when we come out the other side, it's not going to flip back to how it was before. It's a lot of what we're doing we'll be seeing as positives in the business, and I think firms will adapt to that, and that's kind of what we want to support.
So you're in a situation where you're supplying stuff to firms, right? And they're having to adapt how they interact with you in the same way as I guess they have to with their customers. And have you seen people struggling with it? Is that a change for them? Because it's we all talk about like providers and digi-signatures and that, and them getting used to it, and that's one thing. And then we talk about clients, but actually there's this whole ecosystem of stuff that makes an advisor firm work, and that's had to change as well. So how do you think firms are doing?
So there's different parts, I guess, to that, and to the advisor line. From our point of view, obviously, we were already remote to the firms. We were already outsourced. We already communicated with them through our project management systems, so that hasn't changed. Apricity, the compliance firm, is an interesting one. So my original vision for Apricity was, why are we doing compliance in a manual way? Why am I blocking out an entire Friday one day for a compliance person to come and sit in my firm and go through files? This is madness. So we built Apricity to be technology that would do to do compliance for firms and kind of put it all in the control of their hands. But initially, what we found is because we didn't have COVID and we didn't have people forced to change, a lot of firms were still used to the human element, used to people coming into their office and being there and having those face-to-face meetings. So the way I kind of structured Apricity was, I always describe the DNA as sort of 50-50, it's 50% tech, it's 50% human. But over the next 5 to 10 years, those percentages will shift and it'll be 80-90% tech and 10% human, because we're still there and doing the expertise. But like I said, and I think that would have been the progression if it wasn't for the fact that this has made that change entirely. So all of a sudden, all that human stuff that we were doing with firms, that's been taken online as well. No, I think they are generally adapting, and I think the advice firms that we work with, the ones that were already comfortable outsourcing things like power planning and working with compliance and technology, are the ones that have just gone, oh yeah, this is a new challenge, but that's fine, I'm not scared, I'll kind of dive in and do it.
So one of the things that I know, we're going to get some providers on probably in a couple of weeks to talk about digital stuff and whatever. One of them was saying to me, it's all great, but you need to understand, Mark, that you can fash on about digital and web stuff as much as you like, but there's still a lot of firms that like the personal touch, that like getting clients to sign on a bit of paper because it provides a moment of closure, I suppose, sales closure, and also just a kind of line in the sand. And so I have to keep doing paper forms, and I have to keep working in that way. And so I can't get out of it because firms really, really want to do that. Do you see that kind of behaviour? And if so, what happens to those guys?
I don't see that kind of behaviour. I'm smiling because, God, one of my employers off of the olden days, he was the one who still insisted he had to sign our pay checks. You had to be paid by cheque. Couldn't possibly use backs because that didn't give him. He needed to sit there on the 28th of every month with his checkbook and sign them manually for exactly that. It's almost that kind of that tangible emotional thing that people have done for such a long time that even when you can just hit a button and do a bank transfer, I don't want to do that. He unsurprisingly is retired now, and I think that's what will happen. Again, it's that evolution, which ironically was the name of our conference before we cancelled it. It's that that evolution would be happening, and you don't have to have paper. We've mapped out the entire advice process from end to end, from seeing your first client to putting things on risk, and assuming that you're working with one of the more forward-thinking providers, you don't have to have paper. If you're choosing to, that's fine. But the evolution will be that it moves away from that. We've kind of changed our suitability reports, so that's one of the things that we've just launched, and the digital, and they're online, and they can go to clients on an app. And immediately when I was kind of rolling it out to my team, one of the responses was, I already know there's some advisors and they just won't like that. They like that as much as everybody talks about suitability reports being lengthy and unnecessary. They like it, they'll want the paper, they won't want the apps. But then my point was, they don't know that it exists. They don't know that it's an option. They've never tried it. They want the paper. They want the signatures. They want that feel because that's all they've ever known. But actually, once something's put in front of them, I think I said to you, it was the Henry Ford quote that I used on the team, that if I asked the people what they wanted, they would have just said faster horses. But actually, you put it in front of them and, everybody's doing it and the world's changing, it's happening that way, then you might be surprised.
Well, I remember a guy I used to work for, and he used to talk about punctuated evolution in this market. So things change very, very slowly, and then they change really fast, and then they change really slowly again. And maybe this will be one of those points. Listen, I'm very conscious of time and stuff, and that was amazing. Thank you very, very much. I don't know if you can hang around for a bit. Please do. So I'm going to just share the screen again for a wee second, and there we go, and we'll focus in on that. That's perfect. Listen, we're coming to the end of the main part of our time. I did promise that there would be another crap joke this week, and I will tell it very fast. I like this joke. I don't know why all my jokes got animals in them, but they do. So this is a burglar who hadn't quite cottoned on that everyone's at home all the time at the moment, and breaks into a house. And as he's creeping through, he hears a voice saying, "Jesus is watching you." It's like, what on earth? What on earth? And he keeps creeping through, and once again he hears the voice, "Jesus is watching you." And he's like, oh my goodness me. And then he spots a cage in the corner with a parrot in it. And he said, "Is that you? Did you say that?" And the parrot says, "Yes." And he says, "Oh my goodness, God, I got a heart attack. And what's your name?" And the parrot says, "Clarence." And the burglar says, "What a stupid name for a parrot. What kind of idiot names a parrot Clarence?" And the parrot says, the same kind of idiot that named the Rottweiler Jesus. And that's your joke for today. Listen, that's us for this week. For the main part, I say it every week, and I will say it every week. Our friends at the Samaritans, that's the charity that we're closest to at the Landcat, tell us that responses and traffic to their services has never been higher. And if you think what that actually means, that's a pretty torrid state of affairs. So if you are lucky enough to have a few quid square and you're looking for a few quid spare, and you're looking for something to do with it, please do consider including the Samaritans in your giving. We'll see you at 12:30 again next week. If you do have time to click that little green button and rate platforms, we'd really appreciate it. Otherwise, thank you so much for being here again. That's it. Thanks to Cathi. I'll stay quiet for a moment now, and then we'll get into looking at the chat and seeing what's going on. All the best, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
And there we go. Okay, let's have a wee look. John from Sparrow's a stalwart of these. He got a specific question for you, Cathi. How do you see different size firms responding to this? So, I mean, it's really interesting, right? So firms are going to get dragged into doing this whether they want to or not. And I've got a feeling like the kind of people that come on a webinar like this are all kind of on board already. So we're kind of preaching to the choir here. A dude that, probably sitting at home getting very, very cross with everything all the time isn't interacting in this. But do you see big firms doing better, or does size have anything to do with it?
I don't in this context, I don't think
I don't know what you're laughing about, Cathi. I don't know. Did you see something funny in it? I don't understand.
Size has anything to do with it.
What? I didn't say that. It's inappropriate. God, we had Mikey last week doing it. I was really diversity training for you.
No, I mean, there's some really big firms I know that are kind of doing this stuff as well, and I think for them, because they're bigger, they've got a different type of resource. So we've kind of carved ours out into task forces. So actually, if you're a big enough firm and you've got an ops team, you've got a HR team, because it's not just giving the advice to your clients, it's everything. How's your team working remotely? What's your HR strategy? What's your communications policy? Because actually, I can just spend all day now literally just communicating with the team. So the bigger firms have got the ability to kind of to put that in place to kind of manage it out. But then smaller firms have got the agility. So actually I'll get some software, I'll figure it out. I'll pick a couple of clients that will know, it's a bit of a beta test. If it doesn't work, bear with me. And then off they go. So yeah, the firms that we're working with, it's not that there's only one kind of size that's that's doing it. Sorry.
Would you like a moment? Outstanding. From what I see with different kinds of firms and digital adoption, the big guys, I think they're kind of investing at the moment, and I don't know if what Cathi was saying, that the shockwaves from this will go on for a while, right? And it's funny, we were doing our planning even in our wee business, and we could be out of lockdown in 4 weeks from now, right? 3 or 4 weeks. And so we'll just remember that it was 8 weeks of lockdown. But actually it'll be next year. So our cash and all the kind of reserves that you've built up and all that kind of thing, they've got to last probably till 2021. It's not just the 3 months that we're looking at, which is something that Mr. Sunak will have to deal with, I guess, as well. At a kind of macro level. But if those shockwaves kind of carry through, I don't know how big these big programs of investment, I don't know how they'll do. But they could come out of this quite well positioned if they know already what they want to build. So big firms actually might do quite well. Little firms, try to be disparaging or anything, they're stitching stuff together.
Yeah. As
best they can. And I think we're going to come back to, I don't know, maybe firms wanting to do a lot more of stuff, but finding that old chestnut about stuff, thing A doesn't speak to thing B.
Yeah.
And do you see firms getting in, frustrations and that kind of stuff?
I think it comes back to, it's that vision piece, isn't it? So actually, if what you're doing is just trying to stick a few things together to get through right now, then yeah, they are going to be, it's going to be bumpy. It's not going to kind of work. If you're genuinely thinking this is going to be a new world. I saw Holly from Boring Money did a tweet yesterday, and she was saying to advisors, how many, after all of this, when you can see your clients again, what percentage of meetings do you think you'll continue to do virtually? And I think even she was maybe expecting it to be at the lower end, because her options were minimal, none, I'll carry on as it was, 10 to 20, 20 to 40 or 40% plus. And actually the majority of the answers were 40% plus. So, and I think it's those firms who aren't going, I'm just doing this to get through. They're going, actually, this is a new way of working. It's efficient, it reduces costs. And there's so much pressure in the PI market at the moment as well, that we're just hearing horror stories all the time. Even firms that haven't touched DBs, it's not even kind of limited to that. There's just such little supply in PI that actually the more efficient you can get, the tighter you can kind of get your costs down, the more clients you can see. Factoring everything else in, the impact on cash flow, the cost of PI, I think that's what firms are going to need to kind of really pull through and not just kind of scrape through.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I'm just reading the comments down here, and there's folk comparing advisors to GPs and saying, there's Tim from the other week. Hello, Tim. I see you're managing to navigate the chat bit. GPs have gone from virtually no online consultations to the vast majority being by email or VC in 2 weeks. Clients will expect it. And then Gary saying, nah, but they'll go back to face and say, well, maybe they won't actually, because GPs like making money as well, and the more patients that they can deal with, the more money they make. I
have to say, I had a chat with my GP last week, and I called up and they said, no, you can't come straight in. They're doing a triage survey, so it's a phone conversation first. She'll give you a ring and take it from there. And off the back of that, I actually had to go in and get bloods taken. But I was initially, again, reluctant. I'm not used to this. I'm used to sitting down and talking to my GP. I don't want to talk to her on the phone. But it was just so efficient. I went in, I got my blood test. That was, there was nobody else in, obviously, given the current situation. And I thought, actually, no, I would do this. I would go with a virtual GP. It's, again, it's not something I would have wanted to try or would have thought would have worked, but you don't know, do you, until you try?
You don't know. But there's Gary again saying something that I think I might agree with is we might be surprised by how many firms just go back to the old normal. Do you know what I mean? There's like, thank God that's over. Let's get back to business as it used to be. And I was chatting through the other day about nothing to do with financial services, but look at in the days in China, right? In Wuhan, the traffic's back as they ease the lockdown. It's coming back, and so all the stuff we've talked about, hey, you can see the stars for the first time, or the water's running clear, or whatever it might be, and everybody just goes back to how they were. I don't know. What do you think?
There's some elements that way. I mean, we've got short-term memories, haven't we? We see it in financial markets anyway. We see the same issues happening over and over and over again. A lot of things are quite kind of cyclical, but yeah, there'll absolutely be, and like I say, it's not limited to finance. Kind of the world over, there'll be lots and lots of people that just go, great, I'll go back to how I was. But for me, I find it really exciting to not go back to how we were. I find it really exciting to kind of be able to embrace the future and to be doing all this development and to see all this opportunity. So I guess for the firms that go back to how they were, there'll be support firms that will also go back to how they were. They'll tally up lovely.
Yeah.
And then the firms that want to adopt and do this whole new world, there'll be support firms that are kind of built to do that. And that's very much where we are. I find it a lot more interesting. We've done it before, let's do something different.
Yeah, I sort of think that's right. And I know for what we do, man, I spend my life going up and down to London to see people for a coffee and a catch up and whatever else, and that's great. But I don't feel mad about it at the moment. Hello. I don't feel mad about doing that for a while, and that's the other thing, is that a lot of what people want from normality will require us to go back to behaviours that we will probably see as risky.
Yeah.
For a while.
Yeah.
So even when lockdown goes, it'll be phased, I guess, or whatever.
Yeah.
But that'll change. So we're getting asked as well that not just for Cathi, but for anyone on the chat, And by the way, if anybody ever wants to come on screen, just write down, invite me on, and I'll invite you on screen. Please have clothes on. Don't be like Mark Locke. Don't do that. Will fees be coming down as a result of all this stuff? And hey, look at that! There's the best thing that's been on a webinar for whatever with us. How you doing?
Can you say hi? You can sit on that chair. You
can sit on that chair. Don't sit at the weird. Look at the weird guy with the silly t-shirt on.
The thing on that as well is, I think I said this to you yesterday. We have kind of, this is an extreme. I do feel like the pendulum's just gone from there all the way over there. And actually, we are humans at the end of the day. I don't think it'll stay where it is right now. I think, the traffic and the things that you kind of settle back into, I think it'll settle back down somewhere in the middle. I've got an actual list of people I'm going to go around and hug as soon as I can. We are still humans, and there is still that element and that interaction. And personally, I'm already sick of kind of Zoom calls, and I want to get back to events where you can go and see people face to face. So I don't think it's all going, but I also don't think it'll go the whole way back either.
No, that's probably right. Matthew's asking, do we see ongoing advisor charge averages going up or down? And the answer is it's pretty steady. Again, if any of the, I know, just because I know the Nucleus guys are on and they share this stuff, but I think it's pretty steady. It's changing a bit here or there in the averages. Obviously, averages aren't always your friends, but it's pretty steady, and that's kind of interesting. So if we are going to go into a world where the overall costs are going to come down, maybe one of the outputs of this, because somebody else is learning, has asked, so do we learn nothing from all this then? Do we change nothing? Do we just go back? And that doesn't feel right either. It doesn't feel like that's going to be the case. But maybe what happens is that the firms that really, really are on board with the kind of stuff you're talking about, Cathi, start to challenge a bit harder at firms that don't, and they can see more clients, and maybe they can do it at 0.5 instead of 1%, and they can stitch together a portfolio that only costs 20 or 30 basis points, and they can use a custody solution that's very, very low cost as well. And so you get a proper financial planning service all done for under 1% a year. Why not, right? Some things we'd have to change to do that. But, it's not beyond the wit of man.
Sorry.
I was hoping to see the dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are very popular. You've got awesome dinosaurs. And maybe that's what drives it. It isn't the situation that changes what firms do, but it changes what some firms challenge hard on. And that ends up upsetting the apple cart, and people get dragged that way.
Right. Sorry.
Don't worry. I think it's absolutely awesome. And actually, one of the great joys, I think, of what we are all going through is that we get these little tiny windows into people's lives, and dogs turn up and kids turn up and all that kind of stuff. I can tell you that my two cats predictably don't give a shit about anything. It may be that dogs are really happy with this situation because their owners are at home all the time, but my cats don't give a shit. And I think my kids have seen enough of me as well. Listen, I think, we're 15 minutes in. I think we'll probably call it there for this week, if that's all right with everybody. Thank you so much to Cathi. I really, really appreciate you giving me time, Cathi. We'll let you go and deal with the wee guy there. And thanks to everybody for being on the chat as well. We'll be back 12:30 next week for the last time. Again, if you can, take a moment to rate your platforms with the green button. I would absolutely love that. And we wish you a safe and pleasant week. We'll see you next time. Cheers.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.